London from 1100 to 2026. A comprehensive historical documentary. Chapter 1. Medieval London, 1100 to 1400, the Walled Fortress City. Norman London. In the year 1100, London was a modest walled city of perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 souls, still adapting to Norman rule just 34 years after William the Conqueror had claimed the English throne. The ancient Roman walls still defined the city's boundaries, enclosing approximately 330 acres on the north bank of the River Thames. This was not yet the great metropolis it would become, but it was already England's largest and most important city. The White Tower, William the Conqueror's massive stone fortress, dominated the eastern edge of the city where the walls met the river. This imposing structure, rising nearly 90 feet high, served as royal residence, treasury, armory, and prison. It proclaimed Norman power in unmistakable terms. The conquered English could not ignore this symbol of their subjugation. The tower would witness centuries of English history, from royal births to famous executions. Old London Bridge was the only crossing of the Thames, a wooden structure that required constant maintenance against floods, fires, and simple wear. The Great Stone Bridge, that would later carry buildings and become famous throughout Europe, would not be completed until 1209. Until then, watermen ferried passengers across the busy waterway, their cries echoing from bank to bank. The city was divided between Norman rulers and English subjects. The Normans spoke French, lived in stone houses, and controlled the government and church. The English majority continued their daily lives, adapting to new masters while preserving what they could of their customs and language. Over generations, these two peoples would merge into something new, the English nation. The medieval city grows. Through the 12th and 13th centuries, London grew in population, wealth, and importance. By 1300, the population had reached approximately 80,000, making London one of the largest cities in Europe. The city was bursting beyond its ancient walls, with suburbs developing along the roads leading outward. The medieval London Bridge, completed in 1209, became one of the wonders of England. This stone structure, over 900 feet long, supported buildings along its entire length, shops, houses, and even a chapel. The narrow roadway between the buildings was perpetually crowded. The bridge would stand for over 6 centuries, surviving fires, floods, and the weight of countless feet. Westminster, a mile upstream, emerged as the center of royal government. Westminster Abbey, rebuilt in Gothic splendor by Henry III, became the coronation church of English monarchs. The Palace of Westminster housed Parliament and the royal administration. The road between the city and Westminster, lined with noble mansions, connected commerce and government. Churches dominated the skyline. Over 100 parish churches served the spiritual needs of Londoners. Old St. Paul's Cathedral, begun in the Norman period and expanded over centuries, was the mother church of the diocese. Its spire, when finally completed, would rise over 450 feet, the tallest in England until lightning destroyed it in 1561. The Black Death and its aftermath. The catastrophe of the Black Death struck London in 1348 to 1349, killing perhaps half the population. This plague, carried by fleas on rats, spread rapidly through the crowded city, overwhelming every attempt to contain it. Bodies piled faster than they could be buried. The fabric of society seemed to tear apart. The plague's aftermath transformed England. Labor became scarce and valuable. The rigid social hierarchy loosened as workers demanded better conditions. The feudal system, already weakening, accelerated its decline. London recovered its population within decades, but the memory of the plague haunted generations. The city that emerged from the plague was different. New opportunities arose as old families died out. The merchant class grew in power and confidence. The guilds, livery companies that controlled trades, became important social and political institutions. London was becoming not just a capital, but a center of commerce that would eventually dominate national life. By 1400, London had rebuilt its population and was poised for further growth. The medieval city, crowded, vibrant, dangerous, and alive with possibility, had survived its greatest crisis. The centuries ahead would bring new challenges and new transformations. Chapter 2. Tudor and Stuart London, 1500 to 1700, Reformation and Revolution. Tudor transformation. By 1500, London had grown to approximately 50,000 inhabitants and was entering a period of dramatic transformation. The Tudor dynasty, established in 1485, would oversee changes that would reshape the city's physical, religious, and social character. Henry VIII's break with Rome in the 1530s triggered the dissolution of the monasteries, which transformed London's landscape. Religious houses that had occupied significant portions of the city were seized, their inhabitants expelled, their buildings sold or demolished. The wealth that had sustained these institutions flowed instead to the crown and to those who purchased monastic properties. The spaces left by dissolved monasteries became sites for new development. Some became grand houses for the wealthy, others became theaters, prisons, or industrial sites. The religious character of medieval London, dominated by the church's presence, gave way to a more secular urban landscape. London's population exploded during the Tudor period. By 1600, the city held perhaps 200,000 people, quadrupling in a century. This growth came primarily from immigration, young people from across England drawn by economic opportunity. The city could not contain this growth within its walls. Suburbs spread in every direction, creating the beginnings of the metropolis that would eventually become the world's largest city. Shakespeare's London. The late Elizabethan period, the 1580s and 1590s, saw London emerge as a cultural capital. The professional theatre was born, with purpose-built playhouses attracting audiences from every level of society. The Globe Theatre, constructed in 1599 on the south bank of the Thames, became the home of Shakespeare's company and the site where his greatest plays premiered. This was a London of extraordinary creativity and equally extraordinary contrasts. The wealthy displayed their prosperity through elaborate clothing and grand houses. The poor crowded into tenements and struggled for survival. Plague returned periodically, killing thousands and closing the theaters. Crime flourished in the Liberties, areas outside the city's jurisdiction, where the authorities' writ did not fully run. The Thames remained London's main highway. The river was crowded with vessels of every size: merchant ships, royal barges, ferries, and fishing boats. Watermen provided taxi service, rowing passengers between the stairs that lined both banks. "Eastward ho!" and "Westward ho!" they cried, advertising their destinations. Civil War and Fire. The 17th century brought upheaval. The Civil War between King and Parliament, 1642 to 1651, divided the nation, though London itself remained firmly in parliamentary hands. King Charles I was tried in Westminster Hall and executed outside the banqueting house on January 30th, 1649, an event that shocked Europe and demonstrated how far revolution could go. The Great Plague of 1665 killed perhaps 100,000 Londoners, a quarter of the population. Victims were locked in their houses, marked with red crosses, and left to die. Those who could flee to the countryside did so. The streets grew quiet, and grass grew between the cobblestones. The Great Fire of London in September 1666 destroyed the medieval city. Starting in a bakery on Pudding Lane, the fire burned for 4 days, consuming 13,200 houses, 87 churches, and Old St. Paul's Cathedral. Remarkably, only a handful of people died directly in the fire, but the homeless numbered in the tens of thousands. The fire enabled the rebuilding of London in brick and stone, with wider streets and stricter building codes. Christopher Wren designed the new St. Paul's Cathedral and 51 parish churches, giving the rebuilt city its distinctive skyline. The fire was catastrophic, but the city that rose from the ashes was safer, grander, and more modern than what had burned. Chapter 3, Georgian London, 1700 to 1837, Elegance and Squalor. The Augustan Age. The 18th century was London's Georgian era, named for the 4 kings named George, who ruled from 1714 to 1830. This was a period of extraordinary growth when London became the largest city in Europe and arguably in the world. By 1800, the population exceeded 1 million, the first city in modern history to reach that milestone. The Georgian city was characterized by architectural elegance and brutal social contrasts. The West End developed with graceful squares and terraces: Grosvenor Square, Berkeley Square, Bedford Square, where the wealthy lived in uniform brick houses designed according to classical principles. These developments created an orderly, elegant urban environment that tourists still admire today. The East End told a different story. Here, workers and the poor crowded into inadequate housing. The slums of Whitechapel, Spitalfields, and Bethnal Green were as grim as the West End was gracious. The gap between rich and poor was visible in every street, expressed in clothing, housing, and life expectancy. The gin craze of the 1730s and 1740s demonstrated the social costs of urban poverty. Cheap gin devastated the poor, creating addiction, violence, and early death. Hogarth's famous engravings, Gin Lane and Beer Street, captured the social commentary of the age. Eventually, regulation brought the craze under control, but the episode revealed the dark side of Georgian prosperity. Commerce and empire. London's commercial importance grew throughout the Georgian period. The city's port handled the majority of English overseas trade. The docks, West India Docks, East India Docks, London Docks, were constructed to handle the growing volume of goods from the expanding British Empire. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, became the foundation of British finance. The stock exchange facilitated investment in the joint stock companies that financed trade and eventually industry. Insurance at Lloyd's protected the ships and cargoes that connected Britain to the world. The Industrial Revolution, though centered in the Midlands and North, transformed London's economy. The city became increasingly a center of finance, commerce, and distribution, rather than manufacturing. Goods produced in the industrial regions flowed through London to markets around the world. The Regency period, 1811 to 1820, when the future George IV ruled as regent during his father's madness, saw the creation of some of London's most elegant architecture. John Nash designed Regent Street, Regent's Park, and the transformation of Buckingham House into Buckingham Palace. These projects gave London a grandeur befitting the capital of a world empire. Reform and change. By the 1830s, pressure for reform was building. The Great Reform Act of 1832 began the democratization of Parliament, though the franchise remained limited. The Metropolitan Police, founded in 1829, professionalized law enforcement. The first railways arrived, with the London and Greenwich Railway opening in 1836. The transition from Georgian to Victorian London was not abrupt but gradual. The accession of Queen Victoria in 1837 marked a convenient point of division, but the changes that would define Victorian London, industrialization, urban reform, imperial expansion, were already underway. Georgian London had created the framework, Victorian London would build upon it. Chapter 4, Victorian London, 1837 to 1901, the world's capital. The Metropolitan Transformation. Victorian London was the largest, wealthiest, and most powerful city on Earth. The population exploded from approximately 2 million in 1837 to 6.5 million by 1901. The built-up area expanded in every direction, absorbing villages and transforming countryside into streets at an astonishing rate. The Great Exhibition of 1851 showcased British industrial supremacy to the world. Housed in the magnificent Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, the exhibition drew 6 million visitors and demonstrated Britain's confidence in its technological and commercial leadership. London was not merely a national capital, but the center of a global empire. The Victorian period saw massive infrastructure investment. Joseph Bazalgette's sewer system, constructed after the Great Stink of 1858, created the embankments along the Thames and dramatically improved public health. The Metropolitan Railway, opened in 1863, was the world's first underground passenger railway. Railways transformed travel, connecting London to every corner of Britain and creating the suburban commuter patterns that persist today. Charles Dickens chronicled Victorian London's extremes, the comfortable middle classes and the desperate poor, the respectable and the criminal, the pious and the hypocritical. His novels captured a city of extraordinary contrasts, where wealth and poverty existed side by side, separated sometimes by only a street or an alley. Imperial capital. London was the capital of an empire on which the sun never set. Administrative offices managed territories across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. The City of London financed enterprises on every continent. Goods from around the world flowed through London's docks. This imperial role shaped the city's character. Civil servants managed distant colonies they would never visit. Missionaries departed for distant lands. Soldiers returned from campaigns in India, Africa, and beyond. The products of empire, tea, coffee, sugar, spices, cotton, filled warehouses and shops. The late Victorian period saw increasing pressure for reform. The extension of the franchise in 1867 and 1884 brought more men into the political process. Education became compulsory, public health improved. The condition of the working classes, though still difficult, gradually improved through legislation and economic growth. By 1901, when Queen Victoria died after 64 years on the throne, London had been transformed almost beyond recognition from the city of her accession. The horse-drawn world was giving way to motor vehicles. Electric lighting was replacing gas. The telephone was changing communication. The Victorian age had built the infrastructure and institutions that would carry London into the 20th century. Chapter 5, 20th Century London, 1901 to 2000, War and Transformation. Edwardian Twilight and World War. The Edwardian period, 1901 to 1910, seemed a golden age in retrospect, a time of elegance and prosperity before the catastrophe that was coming. London's population continued to grow, reaching 7 million by 1914. The motor car was transforming the streets. The underground expanded, grand hotels and department stores served an increasingly prosperous middle class. The Great War, 1914 to 1918, shattered this world. Though the fighting was in France, London suffered from air raids, first by Zeppelins, then departed for the trenches. Many never returned. The war's human cost was staggering, and its social consequences would transform British society. The interwar period saw London's continued growth despite economic difficulties. The suburbs expanded along the underground lines, creating the familiar pattern of commuter communities. New industries, automobiles, electronics, aircraft developed in the outer areas. The population reached its peak of approximately 8.6 million in 1939. The Blitz and Reconstruction. The Second World War brought devastation to London. The Blitz of 1940 to 1941 killed over 30,000 Londoners and destroyed or damaged over 1 million buildings. Night after night, German bombers targeted the city, while Londoners sheltered in underground stations and emerged to find their neighborhoods reduced to rubble. The spirit of the Blitz became a national myth, Londoners enduring with courage and humor, the king and queen visiting bombed areas, St. Paul's Cathedral standing amid the flames. The reality was more complex, but the shared experience of the Blitz helped shape post-war attitudes. Post-war reconstruction transformed London. Bomb sites became opportunities for replanning. The welfare state provided new services. The National Health Service, council housing, improved education. Immigration from the Commonwealth, particularly the Caribbean and South Asia, diversified London's population. The post-war decades brought both prosperity and decay. The Festival of Britain in 1951 celebrated recovery and looked forward to a modern future. But by the 1960s and 1970s, parts of London were struggling, industry declining, population falling, buildings crumbling. Thatcher's London and beyond. The 1980s brought dramatic change. Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government transformed the economy, privatizing industries and deregulating finance. The Big Bang of 1986 revolutionized the city of London, making it a global financial center competing with New York and Tokyo. Canary Wharf rose on former docklands, creating a second financial center. The population, which had fallen to 6.7 million by 1981, began to grow again. Immigration accelerated, making London one of the world's most diverse cities. By 2000, people from every nation lived in London, speaking hundreds of languages. The 20th century had tested London as never before. 2 world wars, economic depressions, the loss of empire, social transformation. Yet London emerged from the century larger, more diverse, and more globally important than ever. The 21st century would bring new challenges and new transformations. Chapter 6, Modern London, 2000 to 2026, Global Metropolis. The New Millennium. London entered the new millennium with confidence. The celebration of the year 2000, centered on the newly constructed Millennium Dome at Greenwich, marked the transition to a new era. The city's economy was booming, fueled by financial services, creative industries, and tourism. The population, which had been declining for decades, was growing again. The July 7, 2005 terrorist attacks, 4 bombs on 3 underground trains, and a bus, killed 52 people and injured hundreds. This was London's darkest day since the Blitz, but the city's response echoed the spirit of 1940: defiance, resilience, and a determination to continue normal life. The 2012 Olympic Games showcased London to the world. The spectacular opening ceremony celebrated British history and culture. The regeneration of the Olympic Park in Stratford transformed a neglected area of East London into a modern mixed-use development. The Games were widely considered a success, demonstrating London's ability to deliver major events. Brexit and its aftermath. The 2016 Brexit referendum, in which the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, posed significant challenges for London. The city had voted strongly to remain, and its financial services industry depended heavily on access to European markets. The uncertainty of the Brexit process, prolonged negotiations, changed terms, and economic disruption tested London's resilience. The impact of Brexit on London was significant but manageable. Some financial services relocated to European cities. Some European workers departed, but London's fundamental strengths, its global position, its diverse economy, its cultural attractiveness remained intact. The city adapted, as it always had. The COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020 transformed London as dramatically as any event since the Blitz. Lockdowns emptied the streets, offices closed as workers shifted to home working, restaurants, theaters, and shops shuttered. The normally crowded city became eerily quiet. The pandemic accelerated changes already underway. Remote work became normalized, challenging the assumption that workers needed to commute to central offices. Online shopping devastated traditional retail. The hospitality industry suffered terribly. Questions arose about the future of the dense, office-centered city that London had become. Recovery came gradually. Vaccination programs brought the pandemic under control. Workers returned to offices, though hybrid working became common. Tourism revived. The streets filled again with the crowds that had always characterized London life. London in 2026. As we approach 2026, London remains one of the world's great cities, home to approximately 9 million people in the Greater London area, a global financial center, a cultural capital, and one of the most diverse cities on Earth. The challenges are significant: housing costs that exclude many from homeownership, infrastructure straining under demand, and the imperative to address climate change. The skyline continues to change. New towers rise, transforming the historic low-rise character that had persisted for centuries. The Elizabeth Line, Crossrail, finally completed, has improved transportation across the metropolis. Development continues in former industrial areas and along the Thames. Looking back across more than 900 years, from the Norman fortress city of 1100 to the global metropolis of 2026, the transformation is almost incomprehensible. The medieval walls are gone, preserved only in place names and fragments. The Great Fire and the Blitz destroyed much of the physical city, yet London endures, adapts, and grows. What remains constant is London's role as a magnet for people seeking opportunity, freedom, and the excitement of the great city. From Norman knights to Victorian entrepreneurs to 21st century tech workers, people have come to London to make their fortunes and their lives. This human energy, ambitious, diverse, creative, is London's true constant across 9 centuries. The London of 2026 carries within it traces of every era: Roman walls beneath modern streets, medieval churches amid glass towers, Georgian terraces next to brutalist council estates, Victorian infrastructure still carrying 21st century commuters. Each generation has built upon what came before, creating a city that is simultaneously ancient and perpetually renewing itself. What will London become in the centuries ahead? No one can know, but if the past 900 years offer any guide, London will continue to adapt, to grow, to attract the ambitious and the desperate, and to remain one of the world's most important and fascinating cities. The story that began with Norman conquest continues into a future that belongs to those not yet born.